That, sorry?
Unmute, please.
Unmute? Okay. I hope you can see me and hear me, those who are connected virtually, and also Mr. Rector and dear friends here. It's a great honor and it's a great pleasure to be here with you today on this very important occasion. It's a day of a special significance for Ukraine and for the world at the same time, because we commemorate an event that is deeply embedded in our memory. But in so doing, I think, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity that you are giving me to look into, not specifically on the accident itself, about which a lot has been written, technically, legally, and politically, but to look into what that accident taught us and what the accident allowed in terms of nuclear safety in the world after that and even today. So perhaps it would be interesting to start by saying that in today's world, when we talk about nuclear safety, we are equipped and operate in a reality which is radically different from the one that prevailed in 1986. And how and why? The main feature that you can see when you analyze nuclear safety today, and in a way it was triggered by those events on April 26 in '86, is that we are now part of a tightly interlocked system of nuclear safety, which is underpinned by nuclear safety guidelines and standards, and by the establishment of important links of cooperation among nuclear operators and nuclear regulators and the agency. This simply did not exist in 1986. Of course, countries had their nuclear programs, but these levels of cooperation and with it transparency and accountability were not there. And without meaning that this was the cause or the root cause of the accident, they had to do with it. They had to do with it. And we have to look at them with clear eyes and with clairvoyance to prevent this from happening in the future. The fact of the matter is that after the accident, it became evident that a new era of cooperation needed to be opened by virtue or by necessity. It was necessary. It was impossible to operate in silos, and it was impossible to operate in this area in the way we had been doing it until that fateful date in April 1986. So immediately, and here I am very happy to say it on behalf of the IAEA, immediately the IAEA adopted this role, which it had mainly as the international hub for nuclear cooperation, but in those days, these words, this function, this institutionality became a reality, because the whole world converged in Vienna, and at that time, it was clear that cooperation became indispensable. In record time, in record time 2 international conventions, one on the early notification of a nuclear accident, and the other on international cooperation in case of a nuclear emergency or radiological emergency, were adopted. In record time, the international community set up mechanisms of cooperation among operators, which exist until today. They did not exist in the past. Immediately after that, new and deeper, more ambitious and specific safety standards were adopted. And also, as a result of that, a political, diplomatic, and technical process started leading to the adoption a few years down the line of the Convention on Nuclear Safety. A convention which, as you know, establishes a unique system, a unique international system of peer consultation and review, where at each review meeting of the CNS, as we call it, the Convention on Nuclear Safety, every country comes with its national report, and it's subject to questioning, to comments, to suggestions, to praise, but also to criticism by all the others. So this epistemological community, scientific community of cooperation and accountability, one could say, was an offspring of those tragic events. And I believe that as human beings, pain and tragedy are far easier to bear when we know they had a sense. They had a sense. It was not for nothing that these things happened. After this, we collectively learned as an international community that we had to go about this business of producing nuclear energy in a different way. And for that, one needed an institution like the International Atomic Energy Agency, which had been operating before, as I was saying, for many, many years. It was created in 1957, as many of you, I suppose, are aware. But on that occasion, it raised to the occasion and occupied the role it needs to occupy. Nuclear safety is an everyday effort. Is something that simply never stops. Just as the reactors that produce the kilowatts and the megawatts for our economic benefit and welfare never stop, then our nuclear safety activity in the same way is a constant effort. But nuclear safety is not the only thing that needed to be underpinned, that needed to be strengthened, that needed to have this new institutional importance and density. Times bring challenges, and international life is a proof of that. Just a few years down the line after the accident in Chernobyl, new phenomena, for example, like international terrorism appeared, bringing also the prospect of nuclear material being subject to hostile use. And this also required a new awareness at an international level, a new attitude, and looking into things that before were not even considered or were not even thought as relevant, but that required this attention. And here I have in mind the important work not on nuclear safety, but on nuclear security, which is also relevant and also relevant for you in your future careers if you stay in nuclear. The physical protection of nuclear material has become an area, a subject area, which requires efforts, requires institutionality, and requires new norms. And just as in safety we were able to have the Convention on Nuclear Safety, then in the area of nuclear security we moved into the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material. It's a long acronym, CPPNM. But this convention, which was mainly and initially aimed at protecting nuclear material during transportation, because it was felt that that was the weak moment, that was the fragile moment in the chain of custody of the material, was not enough. And so we, as an international community, proceeded to amend this convention to include nuclear material in storage or in use, so we could cover all these activities. And today, we have a system of accountability of nuclear material, which not only applies to the material that needs to be safeguarded, inspected, to put it in simple English, inspected by the IAEA inspectors, but also material that needs to be accounted for to help countries account for it and make sure that nobody can steal it or nobody can divert it to nuclear weapons or to radioactive dispersion, the so-called dirty bomb, which is so easy to manufacture if one gets a hold of the nuclear material, which abounds not only in our big nuclear power plants, in small health institutions, in clinics, in hospitals, and in places where no one could think there is a strategic danger involved. So, as you can see, dear friends, what we have now is a world where the nuclear activity, which is so important, and is so important to your country, so much so that half of the lamps which are illuminating this beautiful hall benefit from nuclear energy. And it's going to continue, as I learned from your president today. So all of this requires this commitment from scientists to be like you and like my distinguished hosts here, from national regulators and from the international institutions like the IAEA, who are behind this big effort. Perhaps before I conclude, and I leave some time in case you would like to put a question or make a comment to me, it is important to bear in mind the importance of this work when we are facing together as an international community two big challenges where nuclear science, technologies, and applications have a role to play. The first, of course, and it is evident in everybody's mind, is a pandemic, which we never thought, perhaps, we would ever face again after what we read in the history books of the Spanish flu and things like that. And still now, people are dying every day. And it is perhaps interesting for you to know that the IAEA is actively engaged in the efforts of the global community to fight and defeat the pandemic. As you know, through nuclear techniques, isotopic tracers and others, it is very possible to very efficiently and rapidly identify pathogens, zoonotic pathogens in particular. This is why last year the IAEA set up a program which is called Zodiac, Zoonotic Disease Integrated Action, where we bring together the efforts of the IAEA, the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, in Rome, and others, together to work, putting from the nuclear community, as it were, our grain of salt in the effort that we are all carrying out together. Also, through the RT-PCRs, which, as you know, are a nuclear-derived technique, we have been able to help many, many countries, and the IAEA has provided this equipment to 128 countries, so that they could identify and diagnose COVID-19 much faster. So this is one. And you can see how the IAEA is bringing science and technology for the benefit of all. And the other, which I think is important to recall today, although it seems more distant and very difficult to comprehend sometimes because we don't touch it and we don't see it, but it's there, and it's called climate change. And as you know, I have been very clearly affirming since I took office and the IAEA that nuclear power has a role to play and is playing a very important role in global decarbonization. In Europe, for example, nuclear energy is by far the largest source of clean energy. And in the world, it is 1/3 of the clean energy which is produced all over the world. When countries face off nuclear energy, you know what happens? Immediately, fossil fuels increase, and immediately CO2 emissions go up. So what we say from the IAEA is that perhaps nuclear energy is not for all, is not a solution for every country, but what we say is that nuclear energy has a role to play, has a contribution to make. And this is why we are going to be present this year. At the end of the year, you may have heard that the countries which are signatories to the Climate Change Convention are going to be meeting in Glasgow, in Scotland, for what is called COP26. It's a conference of the parties. And then we are going to be there with the rest of the international organizations to tell the story from the side of nuclear science and applications, the story that can be resumed as atoms for peace and development, which is the motto of the IAEA. So with these words, I hope that I have been able to encapsulate in a very compressed way some of the challenges, some of the issues where the IAEA is acting for the benefit of all. So I would perhaps stop here, and I would encourage you, if you have comments or questions, I would be more than glad to listen to you and to interact with you. So, Mr. Rector, I hope this has been satisfactory. Thank you very much for the opportunity once again.
Thank you, Mr. Director General. Our academic community is ready to put some questions. I would like to ask our technicals, are we ready? Okay, let's go.
Hello, may I ask a question? My name is Timothy Bibi. Thank you very much for your very important speech. And before I ask a question, I wish to thank the IAEA for the support of our new master program in nuclear security. And in this regard, I wish to thank especially Mr. Dmitry Nikonov and Aum Hakam, who have supported our program with very different activities since 2015. Thank you again. My question, as you mentioned in your speech today, the anniversary of Chernobyl disaster, and my question was connected with this. What the position of the IAEA in the balance between nuclear safety and safety systems, active and passive systems, in the project reactor, in the reactor which are now in development. Thank you.
Shall I address it? This is the question. Yes. What is the position of the EIB? Well, let me thank you very much, Mr. Bibic, for your question. I think it's a very pertinent one. And what I would say is that from our perspective, we don't have a preference. We are actively looking into both aspects. I think the evolution of technology, of course, is trying to look into passive systems, into systems that are always providing more higher levels of safety, if you wish, even using the law of physics and trying to have it operate in a way that does not need specific equipment or systems. But for us, what we are looking is at the existing fleet. And the existing fleet is where we have to combine all different technologies, as you know, because we deal with 172 countries, 30 of which operate nuclear power plants, and even more having research reactors. So this means that for us, all of them are absolutely relevant. Of course, we are looking into new developments. We are constantly looking into the evolution of design technology. But from the perspective of the IAEA, we are offering a service. And in this regard, we have to look at whatever is out in the market and in countries. I hope this clarifies at least a little bit what is our general approach in this debate between active and passive system for projective reactors, because basically you have both. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next one, if there is another question.
Sergey Klevtsov, Department of Nuclear Power Plants and Thermal Power Engineer. My question concerns the so-called Iran problem.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know, mass media write a lot about USA position, about European Union position, even China position, but no words about IAEA position. Please tell something about this to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Klevtsov, for the question. Of course, your question is a technical and a very political question, which is very important, and where the IAEA has an indispensable role to play, because, as you know, the IAEA is charged with the inspections and the guarantees that need to be applied to whatever agreement is reached by the P5+1, meaning the 5 members of the permanent members of the Security Council, plus Germany, under the coordination of the EU, and the guarantees of the IAEA. For us, what is important, if you're asking me about our view, we don't have a political view. We have a technical role. We have a technical role which is indispensable, because without the IAEA, any agreement that could be reached is just a piece of paper. It's something that cannot be verified, and so the international community does not know whether what is being agreed at the political level is being complied with or not. So we take this role with the highest responsibility. And what we try to do is to ensure that the international community has a clear view on what is going on. At this particular moment, what is the situation? As you know, there was an agreement which was signed in 2015. And this agreement lasted in its original way until 2018, when the then President of the United States, Mr. Donald Trump, decided to withdraw from this agreement. What happened was that Iran, in the first moment, stayed in the agreement, but then they decided themselves to start, if I can use a military word, retaliating by gradually stopping to comply with this agreement. And they did it step by step by increasing the amount of enriched uranium, by increasing the level of enrichment, by increasing the amount of centrifuges that they could use, that they could develop. So a number of steps to withdraw from the commitments that were taken there. So now, with the change of administration in the United States, there was a new chapter in this whole thing, whereby the administration in Washington has decided or has announced, President Biden has announced its commitment to return to this agreement, return to the agreement. Problem is, or if you want, there are two sorts of problems. First of all, that in the meantime, there has been a very large number of sanctions that were imposed on the Islamic Republic of Iran, number one. Number two, from the Iranian side, if you want, is that Iran has been accumulating more material, has been accumulating more machines that they shouldn't have, has been starting a number of activities like, for example, work on uranium metal. That is very sensitive, as you know, because there are not many uses for uranium metal, and one of them is making nuclear bombs. So all of these things happen, and so there has to be a way to bring these two actors together again. And this is not easy. The IAEA has a role to play in that process and is trying to play it by providing the necessary technical guarantees. But there has to be a political agreement, which is not on my table, which is on the table of the President of the United States, basically, I would say, and the President of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Because even the other actors, Russia, China, the United Kingdom, France, or Germany, or the European Union, they all want an agreement. But of course, everybody knows that the basic pulling forces are the United States and Iran. So at the moment, this month or the next month, this week of May will be crucial, because at that time they will have to come to some form of agreement. So our view, to return to your original question, is that we are there providing our technical support and advice to the negotiators. And once there is an agreement, we'll be there to support it and to provide the necessary guarantees that the agreement is being complied with.
Thank you. We should be optimistic.
Hopefully.
Could you connect? Let me put my question.
My name is
Sorry.
Yes.
Anna. A question. Does the IAEA plan to conduct a large-scale program to educate the population to reduce their fear of nuclear energy?
I did not quite listen. So is the IAEA ready to have a program on what? Can you repeat that?
program to educate the population to reduce their fear of nuclear energy?
I don't get it. What is the question?
The population to reduce.
Is it here?
No, I'm sorry. Could you repeat, please, the question?
It's not very clear. I don't know. Maybe it's the sound, but do you get it?
Does the IAEA plan to conduct a large-scale program to educate the population to reduce their fear of nuclear energy?
To reduce nuclear energy, you mean? The fear. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very good question. Yes. I'm sorry, Anna. I could not listen very well. Excuse me for that. Excuse me. But what your question was worth waiting for, because it's a very important question, actually. And it touches on one very important issue, which is the issue of perceptions. And of course, this has to do with what happened in Chernobyl. This had to do with what happened in Fukushima as well. So there are a number of perceptions about the dangers of nuclear energy, which I think one needs to confront and one needs to address in a very direct manner and direct way. The way to do this, for me, is very clear and very simple, and it's transparency. One needs to address the problems and the realities of nuclear energy with clarity and with firmness, because I think nuclear energy has a very good story to tell. And this I say on this solemn date with respect and with circumspection because of what happened 35 years ago. What happened 35 years ago in Chernobyl, what happened, let me be very clear, what happened 10 years ago in the northeast of Japan, in Fukushima, was not the result of nuclear science, was not the result of nuclear energy. It was the result of failed systems. It was the result of human behavior. It was the result of human behavior which did not perform in the way it should have been performing. Let me again go back to the examples, because I like to be very clear on what I mean. In the case of Chernobyl, and I was saying it at the beginning of my words, we were operating, or at those days the Soviet Union and the world in general, were operating in a world that did not have the degrees of accountability and common standards that it has today. Something for those, and I have done that, I've read thousands of pages and the minutes, and I'm sure that many here have done it as well, of the hours preceding the accident. Anybody knows that every possible norm of nuclear safety was being violated at that time. When you look at Fukushima, you can also see that very clear safety recommendations and standards were in place. Only thing, a commercial company was not implementing them. Very simple. So what we need to explain time and again is that we need to have strong national regulators, and that nuclear safety is an obligation that has to be followed strictly and to the letter. We also need to address clearly issues like contamination, like radiation, like the effects of these accidents, on which we see that many of the evaluations do not correspond to reality. And what some people do is get frustrated or get angry and avoid the debate. Even in the nuclear community, they say, no, they are exaggerating, full of lies, let's not even waste time in addressing these issues. But the problem is that we live, or not the problem, thank God, we live in free societies, and we have to address these issues. The concerns have to be taken seriously, and we have to explain. And it has happened to me, and will continue to happen to me as Director General of the IAEA, that many people come, sometimes very aggressively. This and this happened, and this and this happened, and there were so many million dying or so many cases of cancer. Well, to those people, what you have to explain is that there are things that like the United Nations Scientific Commission of the effects of atomic radiation that has come to certain conclusions, and this is the data, and this is the information. So we have to have an exercise, a pedagogic exercise. Since we are at a university, we have to have a pedagogic exercise of explaining in all transparency what happened. And I believe that when it comes, for example, to the other issue I mentioned of climate change, the tides and the winds are changing. And many people are seeing that thanks to nuclear energy, millions of tons of CO2 are not being dispersed into the atmosphere. That could be otherwise. So my impression is that this is not an easy task. I would agree with you. But we need to, from institutions internationally, from the IAEA, here, your university, we have to address these issues in a scientific way and explain with all the data and the information available what is the reality. So our effort is aimed at trying to address this issue of perception, and I apologize again for not having heard to your question correctly when you first put it. Thank you very much. Yes?
One more question from Andriy Rozhenko.
Hello, my name is Andrei. Recently, the topic of commercial fusion reactors until 2030 cited in the news from an American company. If the project is successful, will the IAEA control the construction and operation of these types of reactors, as with nuclear power plants, or will another organization be responsible for this?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andriy. Is a very important question, this, and it has to do with the future. As you know, nuclear fusion is not something new. We all know the theory. The great challenge for the international scientific community has been and continues to be to master it in a way which is controllable as it happens to fission, and it can be put to good use in the production of electricity, nuclear power. As you know, there have been a number of international efforts. One very well known to all is ITER in France, where many countries around the world contribute and bring their own experiences. There are also many, including here, many national efforts in the area of fusion. The IAEA would not per se be in the business of building fusion plants when they come to be. But of course, it will be the one that is going to be controlling its safety, security, and operation. There is no other way. I cannot fathom the possibility of the international community setting up a parallel sister international organization just to do this. So we are involved. If you are interested, in nuclear fusion this year. In a month or so, the International Conference on Nuclear Fusion will be taking place. It will be virtual, unfortunately, but it's going to happen, so you can find out through the IAEA website, because we are going to co-host it with the colleagues in ITER in France. And there you are going to have really the elite of international research and nuclear science discussing where we are, how far are we from getting to fusion in a way which is commercially operable. So stay tuned, as they say in America, and it's coming up. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Maria Kovch, and is there a way for the IAEA to solve the problem that some of Ukrainians' nuclear and radiation materials remain in the currently uncontrolled territory of Ukraine? Thanks.
Sure. A very important issue here again, when the IAEA has to deal together with your country with a very tricky international situation. Why is this? Because the IAEA can only certify what it sees. Seeing is believing, and especially for the IAEA. It's only what we inspect that we can certify. The problem here is that with the political circumstances prevailing in the eastern part of your country and in Crimea, there are a number of facilities to which we don't have access anymore. Very good. This is point number one. Point number two is, what do you do about it? As an international organization, we are not a country. We are an instrument of all countries. We said from the very beginning, when the situation emerged, that the safeguards agreement, which means the agreements whereby we can inspect these facilities, that the agency, the IAEA, had with the Ukraine would be those in application in Crimea and in the eastern part of the Ukraine. So we said we are not going to deal with other actors. We are not dealing with third parties. So, which meant that in principle we are respecting international law and the guidance of the United Nations in this regard. But we are short of inspecting some facilities. So this is sort of a quandary. It's a sort of a situation that you have to solve one way or another. And what we are trying to do now, in consultation with the government in Kiev, today I had the honor to have a conversation with the president and the foreign minister, and I will be seeing the prime minister and others, discussing about this. We are trying to find ways to circumvent this political circumstance and to be able to access these facilities without altering the fundamental principle position of the IAEA. So here, if you want, politics, international law, and safeguards are in a sort of mix where you have to apply it, we have to apply it from the IAEA in a wise way that will not complicate things, but rather solve them. So we are trying.
The last question from our rector, Professor Grossi.
Yes.
Thank you very much for brilliant presentation, Mr. Director General. I am not specialist in this area, so I have more general question.
Yes.
For many years in Europe and in the world, the discussion between supporters of nuclear energy and representatives of green development, yes, has been taking place.
Yes.
is your opinion? Whose point of view will win, taking into account, for example, the development of renewable energy development, taking into account, for example, German case and some other processes?
Indeed, indeed. Fascinating question. I think we could stay here for many days discussing that, because it's a fascinating topic, and it will give me an opportunity to return and to continue the conversation with you. But let me try to compress it to this idea. I think in this adopting a zero-sum attitude is wrong. There are valid points, and I will say it from the IAEA perspective, I'm somebody coming from the nuclear community, there are very valid points in terms of the environment and the need to preserve sustainable development and to basically do no harm to the world, to the nature. And this is very valid. And I think nuclear has to be humble and to recognize that this is essential. At the same time, when you look at what happens with nuclear energy in terms of its contribution to climate change, in terms of its ability to fuel economies in a clean way, one has to recognize that, as we have been saying, its role is indispensable. When you look at the climate change issue and the prospects, for example, from the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which is not a group of nuclear lobbyists in particular, that I know, as you know, is the forum of international scientists supporting climate change convention. In all their paths to decarbonization, which means having sources of energy which do not have emissions of CO2, in all of these paths, nuclear energy has a role to play. Can be bigger, can be medium, can be small, like the t-shirts, extra small, small, large, medium, whatever you want. But you cannot do without it. It's impossible to do. And especially now, we saw last week, we had this summit, virtual summit, convened by President Biden, when all the leaders of the world were there, setting ever more ambitious targets. By 2050, half of emissions or no emissions. Well, simply said, this is impossible without nuclear. This is simply impossible without nuclear. So, and in terms of renewables, again, when we talk about this item or this debate, we believe that renewable energies are very important and are positive. We do not take this as a, I come from Argentina, we like football, like in the Ukraine. It's not a football match, one wins and the other loses. No, renewables are very important. But renewables are inherently intermittent. And renewables need baseload energy. So I like to say that in many countries, not all, but in many countries, nuclear is a good articulator that can be there providing for these gaps that renewables cannot. So I would say the challenge that we have is to decarbonize the economy and to decarbonize the energy, because we know this is bad. The goal is not to denuclearize energy. And on this, we are all in agreement. So I believe that each side of the debate should cool down a little bit, like a reactor, and put science on the center of the debate, and not what I like or what the other one likes. And I say it freely because I'm not Westinghouse or Rosatom. I don't have a dog in this race. I live out of a salary, like you. I'm not a commercial person. But we know that science is there to tell us that nuclear has a place. So I think let me say that I am increasingly optimistic, that I start to see that people are recognizing this factor. Of course, there are those who are very, I would say, passionately anti-nuclear, and they will continue so. But when you look at the world map, how many countries do you see that have really faced off? 1? 1.5? Not many. Not many. There's a lot of talk. So I think we have to persevere, and to put, I think, what is more important, and I think it's very important that we say it here when we are remembering Chernobyl, the man, the woman at the center.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director General. First of all, thank you for your visit to our country, to our university. Thank you for your brilliant presentation and your answers for our questions.
You can take your place in here.
In memory of today's meeting, today's lecture, let me present you the lithograph depicting the main building of our university.
Oh, that's very beautiful.